Just as a raise of hands, how many people here are software developers? Okay. How many people here are QA related? And the rest are what, marketing? What else do we have here? What kind of departments do we have? If you are not developers, not QA, and you're interested in testing, are you the managers of all the other people? Okay. Okay, this will apply to everyone who raised their hands. Okay. I want to start with a story, something that I did a few good years ago. I was consulting for a big company. This was a billing-related company, so not life-threatening, unless it was a really big mistake. And we had two teams that were supposed to do a customization of a product for two different customers. But this was a big enough company that basically what the teams were doing, they were just customizing existing modules for different customers. And we had two teams that were supposed to do basically the same changes to the same module for two different customers. And one of the teams was a team that had gone through test-driven development training, and they were doing unit testing, and they've been doing it for about 2 months with some coaching. That's the team on the right. The team on the left was a team that was not doing unit testing or test-driven development. They had not been through any kind of coaching. They were our basically test team. They were the subject without any intervention. And our management decided to do an experiment to see whether the whole TDD thing was actually worth it. And we had planned about 3 or 4 weeks of a release for those two different customers. And we decided to test the difference and to measure what were the differences in terms of time, quality. And you usually cannot do that with companies. So we were pretty lucky to have this situation appear. And what we found out is that obviously in the first stage, the team that was doing test-driven development took double the amount of time to write the same piece of software, almost. So it took them 14 days to develop the same ideas and concepts as the team that took only 7 days because they were doing test-driven development. Because when you do test-driven development, what ends up happening is that you usually write more tests than code. You might end up with 50 or 60% of your code being tests. And that means that your time might double, especially if you lack experience. If you have more experience, it could be less time. It could be 20% more. But in this case, it was 100% more. And then there was the usual cycle of testing and fixing and testing and fixing until finally they released. And they didn't release 7 days later. They released 3 days later than the other team. So the big question we ended up with was, what did they get for those extra 3 days? And here's what we found out. The amount of production bugs at the customer for the team on the right was 90% lower. And the team was happier because they had a set of regression tests, automated regression tests, that were helping them to fix the bugs. So one of the reasons that it didn't take them double the amount of time to release is that when they were fixing the bugs, when testing was finding bugs and they were fixing them, they were actually easier to fix. Because you know what happens? You fix something, you break something else. That's when the regression tests kicked in. So the cycle of fixing and testing was actually faster for the team on the right. But they still got all these things. They got APIs that they liked more. They had less fear of maintenance of the code. I don't know if you know this, but when you maintain code that doesn't have tests, the last thing you want to do is to change it. So if you find a method that you don't like, the last thing that you're going to do is to change that method. But what I like to do is that I copy the method and I give it a new name. And then I do maybe just the number 2 next to it. And then that method I refactor. And then this is how code makes children, basically. And then later, our code becomes harder and harder to maintain. But this team did not have to do that stuff because they had those automated tests, and that was really nice. But for those 3 days, the customers were happier because they had less bugs. The developers were happier because they were producing less bugs. And the managers were happy because the customers were happy. And I'm sure it's the same, right? When I look at this cycle, I'm sure it's the same cycle for you, right? This is not true, am I right? Your cycle is completely wrong. So let me just be honest a little bit. I lied. This is what really happened, okay? This is what truly happened. Is that when you develop the software in a big enough company, you have to start integrating with other people. And you, as we know that in software, all software problems are actually people problems. And integrating with other people's modules created lots of problems. And in that company, integrating into other modules was called Hell Week. That was the week that everyone had no sleep. They were just debugging into the midnight hours. Because the biggest problem is, when you have integration problems, is to find where they are. So you start debugging through all the layers of the code. And this is where the most interesting thing happened, is that the team with test-driven development and unit testing took 2 days to pass Hell Week. Well, the team on the left did 7 days as usual. So what really ended up happening is that the team on the right released 2 days before the team on the left, even though they took double the amount of time to develop the piece of code. And that's something that you usually don't get to see, because when you you think about test-driven development and unit testing, you look at the top line, but it's really hard to see the bottom line, is that the releases can actually be shorter because some things are removed. So why did it take only 2 days? Because there were integration issues. But when they were found, or when they were discovered, we had unit tests to say, no, the bug is not here. So it was easier to go to the right place where the bug was actually existing. So if there was a bug talking to a specific module, and we had unit tests that simulated that module in a specific kind of behavior, and we knew that that scenario was actually passing in our code, then we would immediately go and look at the integration, at the configuration. So it was easier to debug and to find the problems. And that's why the Hell Week became just not so nice week. So they still got this, 90% less bugs in production, and they released earlier. Now, I don't know any manager who would say no to that, but most managers do. Well, now, the reason most managers do that is because they see the top line. And with TDD, it's really hard to see the bottom line. It takes a few months, if not a year, to start seeing the benefits. Okay, that was a nice story. But let's be honest. This talk is probably not going to make any difference whatsoever. I'm sure you've heard plenty of talks about plenty of great things to do. I'm sure that somewhere in this organization, someone is trying to convince someone for about a year now to start doing test-driven development, and that other person is like, yeah, sure, and then they still don't do it. I'm sure that we've all been trying to convince other people for a while to do the things that we really care about, that we think are the right things. And the truth is that we're doing it wrong. Just trying to convince people doesn't make any difference. Just me here talking to you is not going to make any difference. The difference is not made because there are other forces except just convincing someone. And that's what I want to talk to you about. Why do all our efforts to change things fail? And one of the books that I highly recommend in this regard is called Influencer, The Power to Change Anything. And this book talks about how a team of people were able to make changes in groups as small as New York gangs or as big as whole communities in Africa. affecting millions of people. And what made the difference? And so let's talk about that. The key sentence that you need to understand is that when you see someone doing something or not doing something that you think that they should be doing, for every behavior that you see, the world around that person is perfectly designed for that behavior to happen. So you could say that if you were that person, you would have done the exact same thing. If you grew up where they grew up, if you had their parents, if you had their education, if you went to their schools, if you went to their jobs, if you had their brothers and sisters, their parents, if you had their managers, their systems, their computers, their desk, you would have done the exact same thing as they're doing, their history. Everything is perfectly designed for what we're doing right now. If someone is not doing test-driven development, it's not necessarily because they don't want to. It's because something is well designed around them. The system around them is designed to prevent that from happening. And we have to start playing Sherlock Holmes to understand what it is that's affecting the behavior. If I want someone to start doing unit testing and they're not, then I have to start doing other things than just convincing them. So I want to give you 6 points to think about. We usually only talk about the first 2. Personal motivation is the convincing part. Hey, why don't you want to do unit testing? You know, it's great. You know, that team was able to release faster. The quality will be higher. Let's do pair programming. Let's do that. And still it doesn't happen. The second thing that we usually try to do is personal ability. We send a person to a 2-day Scrum Master class, and then we expect them after 2 days to be a Scrum Master, to be agile, to learn and lead and do all these things after 24 hours. And then we wonder why that doesn't happen. So let's talk about the other 4. Social motivation, social ability, structural or system motivation, and system ability. Let me go through each one to explain. Personal motivation is, does the person actually want to do or they believe in the good behavior? As an example, I was once talking to a person who was not doing unit testing. And what I had to do, and this is important, I had to actually talk to them. Okay? The big difference is that when I was their team leader, I went and I sat with them one-on-one, and we talked about something that bothered one of us. So I confronted him, but not in an aggressive, assertive way, but just talked to him to understand why he's doing or not doing what he's doing. And one of the things that we usually forget to do is to actually talk to the person who we wish would be different in their behavior. We think we talk to the person, but usually we talk in our head and we say, I know what they're going to say. And so we finish the conversation in our head and we say, yeah, that's not going to work. But it's usually just a mechanism to protect us from actually having an unpleasant conversation. But the truth is that if we had a conversation and we were actually trying to change something, the only way to understand why someone is not doing something is to talk to them. So to understand, does that person actually believe in the good behavior? And to my story about the person with the unit testing, that person does believe in unit testing, or did, but in a previous project, it went so horribly bad that in this project, that person just refused and said, no, never again. And so now you can at least start talking about how to solve that perception problem. Or maybe he's right, and maybe the perception is with me, that I shouldn't be doing unit testing. But at least I'm going to learn something. Now, the personal ability is important, but that's usually the thing we take care of first. I'll just send that person to the course. Are they physically able to do the task? If a person never shows up for a stand-up meeting on time, is it a motivation problem? Or do we just tell ourselves, that person doesn't care about my project. He's doing this on purpose. Of course not. Maybe they have a problem getting there on time. Do they live far away? Are they in a wheelchair? Is there something that prevents them from coming to work on time? Talking to them, again, is important. So the personal stuff, that's usually the first things we think about, but we try to avoid the actual talking and on a one-on-one basis. But in terms of group or the social activity, group motivation, if you think about that person who doesn't show up for a stand-up meeting, you think about the team around them, how do they react? So I was consulting for a team, and the team leader said that we had a person like that. They never show up on time. And I say, okay, when he doesn't show up on time, what do you do? And the team leader said, well, we don't do anything, really. We just, we sigh. And then we move on. And I said, okay, well, why would that person stop then? There is no reason for them to stop. They don't know that they're making someone feel bad. They don't know that they're hurting someone. They don't know that someone is annoyed because of it. Has anyone tried talking to the person? No, we think that they understand what's going on. We think. But this is a way to avoid a personal conversation. So the way that people around you react changes your behavior. If you're the only person doing unit testing in your team, and when you do unit testing, everyone around you is like looking at you and say, why are you even doing that? Come on. It's not going to be a long time until you actually stop. So if you want to actually change the behavior, you have to start looking at the people around the person. Do they support the positive behavior? Do they support the negative behavior? If everyone around that person is not doing unit testing, or maybe people that they respect say that unit testing is to be avoided, that's something we have to start taking care of. So social ability and social motivation are about push and pull forces. Do people push you in the right direction? Are you pulled by someone that you respect in the wrong direction or the right direction? So if you have, let's say, a manager that says, no, we do not have a budget to get an automated build machine, how do you change that person's mind? Well, one way is to find a manager that they respect and that does have an automated build process and get them talking about that specific thing. It's amazing how much just talking to a person that you respect, even outside the team, about something that you've always thought X, changes your mind. When I talk to my wife and we disagree, it only takes one friend to say, yeah, I think that's actually true. And she's like, oh yeah, you know what? Maybe that's right. Maybe that's just me, though. She needed to hear it from someone she respects, you see. So, and the third type of category is the group or the system or the company or the environment. Does the environment actually support what you're actually trying to do? So if everyone is actually wants to do pair programming, everyone has the motivation, everyone is trying to do it, but all the tables are shaped like there's a round thing and there's room for only one person to sit at the table. So the table is shaped so single programming is going to happen. And if you want to do pair programming, one person has to sit behind you to go like this. That's an example of an environment that stops you from doing a specific practice. Or a budget for a build machine will stop you from doing unit testing and automated testing. A budget for build agents or anything like that. That's an example of physical environment that prevents you from doing something. So even if you want to do it and everyone around you wants to do it and the people you respect think you should do it, you just don't have the budget to do it, and then things are stopped there. So the system is preventing you from doing it. But even if you had the budget, maybe you still wouldn't do it. Sometimes companies are designed to have rewards for doing one behavior versus another. As an example, Mike Cohen, in his book Succeeding with Agile, has a nice story where he was talking to people about pair programming. And then one person just got up and left the room and says, I'm not doing that, just left the room. And Mike then talked to the person. And what he realized, the person told him that the company has an annual review. And in the review, the quality of your code is examined. So that sounds good, right? And you get a bonus if your code was high quality. Sounds good. But if you do pair programming, you don't know which code was written by you. So you will actually get less money at the end of the year if you do pair programming. Obviously, that person didn't want to do that. So we had to design different reward system for doing specific behaviors. So even if the person is really willing and wanting to do it, and you have all the resources and the environment is available, the reward structure might actually stop you from doing it. If you want everyone to have a healthy life, working until 5 o'clock, but you have one manager that at 5 o'clock goes to the parking lot and counts the cars that are still in the parking, or just stays, until 6 o'clock or until 9 o'clock, just stays there so that everyone sees that he's still there running around in his office, so that everyone feels ashamed to go home early. Well, that manager is still there. That's an example of a company culture, or not a company, but a team culture or a management culture that will prevent you from doing a specific behavior or pull you in the wrong direction. So all these things, they matter. So even if you got that person and you explained your heart out, how important and how great unit testing and TDD really is, the chances that that actually is going to change just by talking are very, very small. This is the way that the book, by the way, presents it. And now I'm going to talk about how to solve some of these things. So let's say that you do encounter one person in a team that doesn't want to do something. I would literally create such a chart for me. I wouldn't sit with the person and say, this is your chart. You have this and this and this problem. But I would sit myself and basically look for clues because I know the organization. So if we're talking about personal motivation, and that person doesn't want to do something, you have to make something that's undesirable desirable. I have 3 kids. You know what it takes to get 3 kids to clean up their room? A game. That's what it takes. It takes a game. It takes a challenge. I can make it competitive. I can make it non-competitive. If I make it competitive, I'm pulling them in the wrong direction as adults later to fight with each other as brothers. But I can make it a game where they're a team against me. And now they have to serve as a team. So I'm like the bad guy. But I'm going to take all their toys away if they don't, catch them at the right time. And I'll give them to other children. So you see, sometimes being the bad guy gathers everyone together against you, which is exactly what you want. But sometimes it's about moral values. It's about reminding people that when they do things like high-quality code, they actually save lives, or they don't kill people, which is important. When we're talking about personal ability, we're talking about things like training, but we're also talking about growing people in your team. If you're a team leader and you have people who want to do unit testing, but they're afraid to do unit testing because maybe they're afraid to change the estimates, because unit testing will make you change your estimates. Things will take longer. And one of the scariest things to do is to go to your manager and say, hey, you know that thing I said it's going to take a week? Not going to take a week. It's going to take 2 weeks. Right, that's going to happen real soon. Everyone's just going to run to their manager and say, it's going to take double time. And all the managers will be so happy. And everything is just going to work perfectly. So how do you change that? Well, of course, we have to change the system to allow longer estimates. Because if the system doesn't allow longer estimates so that people can learn how to do unit testing, everything we say here is moot. Okay? If you go to a 3-day unit testing course and you don't allow people slack time to learn and do things slowly, slowly means 200 to 300% slower, at least, than they used to do things. Things are not going to change because that person is going to be expected to do the same work at the same amount of time, or maybe, 20% more. Doesn't work. When you teach your kid to tie their shoelaces, right, you teach them once and then you say, okay, it takes me 30 seconds to tie my shoelaces. You're going to have 50 seconds, kid. And then you expect that kid to be able to tie their shoelaces for the first time with 20% time more than you. That's not going to work. It takes a long time to practice, a few good weeks, a few good months, until that kid actually gets it. And the same goes for unit testing and TDD and any practice. So we need to change the system, but we also need to tell our managers that we need longer estimates. So even if the system allows it, but the person is afraid to say it, it's not going to change. So I need to grow the people in my team and coach them and teach them how to say it's going to take longer and to be able to have the courage to say it. Because if you're a professional, the time it takes is the time it takes. If I take my car to a garage and I want to fix it, I don't say, yeah, that's too long. I need you to fix it faster for me. No, when the person says it will take them 3 days to fix it, it's going to take 3 days. I'm not going to argue with them. They're a professional. They know what they're doing. But here, in software, we usually let other people dictate what it's going to take. You know, I was once on a project that I had 3 months to finish an 8-month project. I'm sure you've never been there yourself. And you know what it's like in a project when on the first day of the project you know it's going to fail? That's a great feeling. I mean, it's very releasing. You can just do whatever you want. Then I went to my manager and I said, it's not going to take 3 months. It's going to take 8 months at least. My manager said, look, Roy, I know you can do it. We need it in 3 months. I know you can do it, right? What did I say? Like a wuss, I said, yeah, I'll try, okay. And of course, it failed miserably. And, you know, but we learned a lot. I learned a lot that I can't just say something that's not true. I'm literally lying to the person. But it takes courage not to lie to the people that want to hear something specific from you. We want to make other people happy. But we have to be realistic, and that takes coaching to tell other people the reality. So that's a personal ability, our ability as developers to tell other people really what's going on. If we're talking about peer pressure, if I want someone to start doing something, if everyone around that person is doing that something, that's going to change. You ever had that, you've seen that experiment, the person goes into an elevator, but everyone in the elevator is facing the wrong way? And then that person, what do? They face the wrong way as well. They just look at the wall. And they have no idea why. They're just looking at the wall because everyone else is doing it, and it feels weird to be the only one who's doing something different. So peer pressure is one of the greatest ways to change something. But to be able to do that, you have to change the peers and their behavior. But what I'm trying to say here is that sometimes the peer pressure creates the negative, and that's what you have to break. That person is not doing X because everyone around that person, or some people around that person, are pushing not to do it. So you have to talk to those people before you fix that problem. And of course, there's the system. I talked about that. And there's one other important lesson here. I told you about 6 forces. You have to fix all of them before something actually changes. If you fix 3 out of 4 that have to be changed, the problem is not going to stop. You have to fix all 4 things, or all 6 things, if all of them need to be changed. So if a person has a problem with motivation, and also the system prevents that person from doing something, you have to fix those 2 things before that behavior will change. If you just get the motivation working, but the system still prevents it, nothing is going to change. If you just fix the system, but no the motivation, nothing is going to change. So you have to start playing Sherlock Holmes to understand why things are happening. And maybe by now some of you are saying, you know what, I did not sign up for this. I'm a software developer. I'm not a psychologist. And that's absolutely true, but you are wrong. You have to start being psychologists. If you want to start changing things, you have to start understanding people. Software is about people collaborating or not collaborating. Every software problem is a people problem. If you don't understand people, you're always going to be stumped. Why is that person not doing that? I have no idea. And you're going to continue to bump your head against the wall. So you have to start decoding the signs. And you have to start learning new skills, except just typing things into a computer. You have to start learning about people, and learning about these things is important. It's going to make your job more interesting as well. It's going to make you more valuable to the company as well. You see, now I'm giving you motivation. It was a joke. Here's an example for something that actually happened. I was doing a workshop. I'm doing a 2-day elastic leadership workshop for team leaders, for software team leaders. And one of the things that happened is that we had one of the things that we do is we go through that chart and everyone raises things that they would like to fix in their team. And one one team had a person that never does TDD. Everyone else is trying. That person always says, yeah, I want to, but they never get to do it. And the team leader was stumped. So after a few investigations, we started talking about these things, and he said, well, when I talk to the person, he says that sometimes there's no time for test-driven development because we have to fix the mistakes really, really fast. So we started investigating, why is that, why is that, why is that? After about 4 whys, we got to the realization that when they deploy the system is deployed. There is no going back. So if you find a bug in the deployed system that's really, really bad, everything has to stop and everyone has to go and fix it immediately. There is no time to do anything. Everyone just has to go guerrilla style and just fix it in production. And we realized that what prevents that person from doing TDD is that the system doesn't allow to have automated deploys and rollbacks. Because if we had a rollback, we could then roll back the code, fix it with unit tests and everything else. But when we don't have rollbacks automatically, what we get is that we have to fix bugs in production that are really patches of ugly code that just to make things work. But that has no test, that has no continuity, it's not scalable, it's not sustainable. But the system is demanding you to do it because it's absolutely necessary. So to fix that problem, you have to fix something else at the system level. That person wanted to do TDD, but he was being heroic and saying, I have to stop what I'm doing, the things that I believe in, and I'm going to do the horrible stuff that I hate doing, which is not writing tests, and just fix things in production, even though I hate that, because there is no other way. So he was actually, at some point, he was labeled as the guy who doesn't want to do TDD, but he was actually the guy who was suffering for everyone else, who just kept doing TDD, nicely, and he was there working at night fixing bugs in production, but he really wanted to. So that was a complete misunderstanding. And that's an example of how looking at this chart can give you hints of what you can actually fix to change real behavior. So I'll give you some examples of practices that you can do that will affect the forces around people to change their behavior. The first practice is that you have to have slack time. There's a whole book called Slack. Probably some of you have read it. This book is a great book. It takes some time to read it, and the whole book is about having time to learn new things. And one of the things that I fully believe in is that most software teams are in what I call survival mode. Survival mode is where you don't have enough time to learn, and you just run around chasing your own tail, fixing fires. So you never have time to do unit testing in TDD, because who has time? Because we are already late for 2 months on the things that are already not working because we tried to fix the things before that and before that. So we're just basically in a race against time and against ourselves. And now you're going to teach us TDD and unit testing? Thank you, but no thank you. And that makes sense, because in survival mode, nobody has time to do that. Nobody has time to learn in survival mode. The only way to get out of survival mode and into learning mode is by making time. And that means that team leaders have to go to their managers and start changing estimates. And that's going to be scary. But let me tell you something about scary. Scary is good. Scary is great. Because when you're scared, when you're afraid to do something, when you're uncomfortable doing something, it means you're out of your comfort zone, and it means you're going to learn something new. And if you're team leaders, learning something new is your job. And then teaching something new to your team is your job. If you are able to take the risk, then you can ask your team to start taking risks. Now, some of your managers are actually sitting here and listening. And they're hearing what I'm saying. They might be more open to what you're going to say to them than you think. You have to start taking chances and asking for more time. If someone says no, you open the chart and you say, why did that manager say no when I asked for longer estimates? And then you start guessing and looking at various things. Does the system prevent that manager from changing things? Are other managers not giving estimates? How do the peers around that person? Does everyone else say, no, that's not necessary? You have to start taking this seriously. Now, if you really want to get out of this, and you really want to do unit testing in TDD, Nothing is going to make you start doing it until you actually get more time to learn. That means all your estimates have to be longer, like I said. 200, 300% more for at least 2 or 3 months. That's the time it takes to do deliberate practice for your team to actually do something. Unrealistic? Not necessarily. A lot of team leaders are doing it. The only difference is that you're afraid, and that's okay. Good management is a really tough job, okay? That's why managers usually get paid more. But a lot of managers like to take the money but not do all the hard parts. That's the hard part. Asking for things, confronting about ideas, looking reality in the eye and actually doing something about it. That's true leadership right there. But it's really scary. And I had to do it myself, so I know how scary it is. But I can tell you that nothing bad is going to happen to you or your team. The worst thing that's going to happen is that someone is going to say no, and then you get to learn about how to ask better. So slack time is the first thing. That gives you the ability to start learning. Once you have that, you can start doing pair programming. Pair programming is a good way to learn a new practice, especially if it's as difficult as unit testing and test-driven development. If you start doing TDD alone, you're going to have a much harder time. That's why when I do workshops, everything is done in pairs. Because in pairs, everything is a bit less scary. And when you confront something, you're not stuck. You can always talk to someone about it. They're just as stuck as you are. And it's also more productive. You get things done. There are studies that show that pairing is actually more productive and higher quality code than doing the same task one after the other. So you don't have to pair 100%, but if you pair even 50%, you're still going to ask the pairs to do unit testing and TDD when they pair. You're going to get a lot of learning done, and you're still going to share a lot of knowledge about what you've learned. Without pairing, unit testing and TDD, the first few months is going to be a lot harder. The second thing that you absolutely have to do if you want unit testing to be sustainable is to do code reviews and actually look at your code, at the code that your people are generating. And everyone has to look at everyone else's code. That raises the bar and the quality bar of everyone else. Everyone learns tricks from everyone else. But not just code review, test review. Okay, when other people write tests, you go and you look at those tests before they check in, hopefully. And when you look at the tests, you give notes about things that you've learned, or you learn something from the tests about the naming conventions, about the readability, the maintainability of the tests. If you want tests to be maintainable and sustainable, like you're going to learn in this conference, you have to do reviews. You have to look at other people's code, and that takes time, which you already have because you got slack time from before. The third thing you have to do is to remove bus factors. A bus factor is how many people have to get hit by a bus for the team to stop working. If you have that one person who knows how the build process works, and that person tomorrow gets hit by a bus, I'm sorry, your team doesn't know how to work with the build, everything is screwed up, and you've lost a month or two just learning about how to work with it. Pairing helps remove bus factors. If you have just one person who went to unit testing school and TDD, whatever, and only that person knows how to do it right, that's a bus factor. Everyone else is going to do it crappy. And that if everyone else does unit testing crappy, they're going to start deleting tests in about 4 to 5 months. And everything is going to be lost, all that investment. So you have to do more pairing and do more code reviews so that the bus factors are removed. The higher the bus factor, the better you are. And of course, you have to have some leadership abilities. Now, I believe that every person who is either a team leader or an architect or a specialist in any kind of thing is a potential leader. So if you are that one person in the team who knows something, if you are the bus factor, you're also the leader. It's your job to start spreading the knowledge. It's your job to make yourself unnecessary. Sounds weird? But it's your job to be able to go for a vacation of 7 days and not have to worry about opening your phone. People should be able to do their work without you. If you are the only person, then you are a bottleneck. You're stopping the team from being productive. You're not sharing knowledge. By being a leader, what I'm saying is that I want you to start teaching other people to do your job so that they can become leaders in that field as well. So an architect is a leader of architecture. Okay? A person that had the build master is an architect or the leader of the build. Everyone should be able to manage the build, right? Agile is about shared code ownership. With all that fluffy stuff, the way you actually make it work is you go and you start sitting with that person. There's a push and pull mechanism that happens. A person that realizes they don't know something and someone else just solved their problem, that person should just go and say, hey, can you teach me how you did that, please? Let's sit together. I want to see how you do it. That's one thing. But the other person will say, also has to do something. If the other person, who's the expert, sees that he's the only one who knows how to do something and he's doing that something, he'll grab one other person from the team and say, look, I'm going to do this thing. Nobody here knows. I want to teach you how to do it. Come, let's do it together. And that's the point, is that people have to be proactive. They have to not be shy about working with other people. They have to be absolutely leaders, to lead someone down a path and to teach them something. And if you truly want this to succeed, don't give up for at least 6 months. If you give up after 2 months, you haven't seen the results yet. Take 6 months at least to see that something actually changes. You have to have management backing for 6 months to be able to say, it's going to take time, there's an initial time investment, things will change, but the longer the cycle that we have for release, the longer we have to wait to see the result. That's important, because if you give up halfway, you might have done the right thing, but you'll never know until you actually start doing 2 or 3 releases, and then you start seeing the benefits. So, just to summarize, there are benefits to unit testing and TDD, but none of it matters if you're not prepared to take a chance and actually get more time and start doing some practices to make them happen. It doesn't matter how much training you're going to send your people to. It doesn't matter how much you talk at them. If you don't start confronting the actual issues that you have and to talk about behaviors and look at behavior forces, nothing is going to change, because everything is already designed for what's currently happening to continue happening. So you have to start changing the world around the person.